they invented gefilte fish. So all the fish would be ground up and you wouldn't have any bones.
Interesting. Um,
I'd always heard it had to do with the bones.
if I knew the daf, I would open it right now because you have a whole set of shots over here. But it's in Shachim. I remember that much.
Where's Shachim? I can find it.
Yeah, well, you have to find the right page. It's not even worth it.
Okay, so I just want to look through them. Where's the Shachim? Could you just tell me?
Somewhere up there. Here. So take a look over here. Oh, actually, look at that. That's the one missing one there.
Orla.
Really?
Orla.
That's so unfair.
So the answer to the question is that the Gemara certainly gives that reason. The reason of
The skin disease, really?
yes. It could be that there are other practical ones, but that's what the Gemara says, and so I never heard that other one. That's what I heard. It's probably in there. You're right. If there's a book about it, so Bruce has pointed out there's a book that was written about Talmudic medicine that probably would have it in there. It talks about this passage in the Gemara, and I'm not saying that the other concern wasn't brought up, throughout the years in amongst poskim, but that's definitely one of the Gemara gives that I recall.
But Rav, Hinder's point is still very valid. It's not a kashrut issue. It's an issue of concern for health. Whether
so as is the Gemara's
what the Gemara suggests.
As is the Gemara's reason of saras. Saras, I think you get some sort of skin condition, and that's not a kashrus issue either. It's a safety issue. And I think that I think it was SARS. It was definitely some sort of maybe I'm mistaken, but it was some ailment that would result. And
maybe when they realized that ailment was fictitious, they had to come up with a different reason. So they came up with the bones.
Yeah, maybe you never know. I have to look into this whole history also myself. About
Curious to know.
Changing your fork is then just
changing your fork is that a chomer on top of a chomer?
Of course it is. Of course it is. If it's not a kashrut.
Yes. Sorry, Sammy, what were you saying?
I said, of course it is. If it's not a kashrut issue, what do you have to change the fork for? And also, you mentioned, well, maybe if we realize it, maybe we could change it. How can you change anything midrabanan? Isn't that the problem we have with Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios?
So not exactly, because Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios was already acknowledged by the Gemara. The Gemara was very well aware that they had set a calendar, and they say, nonetheless, we're going to continue with the tradition of second day of Yom Tov, even though we know what day of the calendar it is. On the second day, we know it's the 16th of Nisan, but the Gemara, that's Yom Tov Sheni is harder to deal with because the rabbis of the Gemara already dealt with it, and they said Minhag Avosena B'Yadeinu, and we're keeping the second day. So there was already this sort of legal idea that was put into place by the Gemara that even though we know what day it is, we must still observe the second day of Yom Tov.
So how do you deal with the notion of in Eretz Yisrael of only Yom Rishon?
What was that about the Eretz Yisrael?
How do you deal with the observance of Yom Tov only with the Yom Rishon in Eretz Yisrael?
Well, but because that was what they did, that was the tradition. The whole idea of Chutz La'aretz keeping the second day was that there was an acknowledgement that this is what we do in Chutz La'aretz, what's happened, and we know that it's really the calendar is fixed, but nonetheless we keep our traditions of our ancestors, and we move forward with the second day of Yom Tov. So we'd have to go back and find the deliberation of whatever Sanhedrin when they were having that discussion and say, no, please. Don't make this decision for all time. That's unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the story of Yom Tov Sheni, which is why it's different. That the Gemara knew about, they made a clear-eyed decision to observe the second day of Yontif and treat it like it's the first day.
Okay.
Yes, Bruce. Oh, that's important, of course. All right, so we're going to start now with Sif Test. Simon Reish Ayin Aleph Sif Test, the third line in my edition of the Mishnah Berurah that I have, and this gets to, because last week we finished with the we talked about the aspect of Tashlum, and that if I forget to say Kiddush on Friday night, or purposeful or not, I can always say Kiddush. Not just the Baruch Hagafa bracha, but the bracha that ends with Mekadesh HaShabbos, I can say that the next day, during the day, and then we had a whole question: what happens if I only remember is Bein Hashmashos, the Shabbos is about to end? So that's what we talked through, and now Sif Test turns to an interesting topic, which is covering the challah at the table when we make Kiddush. And here, when we get there, I'll share what I observed when I was a child at my own family's table, and yeah. So let's read, and then we'll learn Mishnah Berurah. Okay, Tarich Shetiye Mapa al Hashulchan Tachas Hapach uMapa Acheres Prusa al Gabav. So the Shulchan Aruch says, I believe it's based on Tosfos. He says that there needs to be a mappa, a cloth, on the table underneath the bread, and a mappa acheres, not the same mappa, but a mappa acheres, another cloth, on top of the challah. So one underneath and one on top, not just on top, but on both sides. Take a look now at the Mishnah Berurah, who's going to give us a lengthy understanding of this discussion based on the Yerushalmi. Mem Aleph, Sifkat on Mem Aleph Al Gabav, Betur B'Shem HaYerushalmi, the Tur in the name of the Yerushalmi, cites two opinions. Shelo Yireh Hapas, why do I have to cover the challah in general? Shelo Yireh Hapas Boshto, She'ed Mikachin Alav Ela Alayayin. The Gemara, the Yerushalmi says that the bread should not experience embarrassment. Bosheth, embarrassment. The bread doesn't deserve it. It doesn't deserve to be embarrassed. So that otherwise the bread will seem embarrassed that we're not making kiddush on it, but rather on the wine. But an embarrassment for the challah. Where does the embarrassment stem from? It stems from that, but any other time, the Sif and Shulchan Aruch about this. We covered it now at this point many years ago. But what order, if I have a whole plate of food in front of me, what bracha do I start with? I have fruit, I have vegetables, I have bread, I have a bottle of wine on the table. What do I start with? And the answer is I always start with bread.
Yeah.
Right? I always start with the bread. And so now this time I'm not. What an embarrassment for the bread that I chose to skip over it when it knows that it has a din of kedima. Right? It gets preference. But here, not today. And so therefore we cover it. Therefore, let's make it a conclusion, though. If the reason of covering the challah is because of the embarrassment against the wine, they make kiddush over bread, they didn't have wine available. There's no point, according to that reason, to cover it with mappa. Nothing. There's no reason at all. Okay? Aval etam acher shekasav hatur shu zecher laman. But according to the other reason that is cited in the Tur, that the reason that we cover the challah is to remember the man, the miracle of the man. Again, the reason we have shtei lechem is for man, but why are we covering it is a further reenactment of the miracle of the man. Well, the man was when it was fall. Apparently, it would look like almost like it was in a box. Munach b'kusla. On top it was covered, and on bottom by dew. So when they would come out, when Bnei Yisrael would come out in the morning to pick the man, there was dew on the surface. I say grass is a desert. On the surface, all right, and then also then there was the man, and then there was dew covering the man. So we do this as well according to this reason. So then, if that is the case, so Mamela Gam Makadesh Alapas Tarch Lachasos B'Mapa. Then if that's the reason, there's nothing to do with being embarrassed about the wine. Then even if I'm only making kiddush over the challah, I should cover the challah as a zecher laman. And he says v'chein nohagim. And he says that the custom is such that I would, if I had to make kiddush over bread because I didn't have wine available, I should still cover the challah at the table. And even though that's how I'm gonna use that for kiddush, and he's actually going to specify how you will specify actually in a moment how I do this kiddush, because if I'm covering it, how do I leave it on the whole kiddush? Do I not? Shlomo and then Simeon. So Shlomo first. Yeah, go ahead.
You're talking about putting something under the challah, right?
Yes.
So isn't that the cover that covers the entire spot, the entire table?
You're saying, can the tablecloth count as the underneath part?
Right, because if we're going to Zecher Laman, it's supposed to be just only under the bottom of the challah and on top of the challah.
Right.
Here we have a challah. We have a cover on the entire table that has the wine and everything, and then we have a cover on the challah.
Yeah.
So white tablecloth is supposed to be for the wine also, right?
So here a clever response. They're probably too sharp. Would be that a clever response would be that the dew probably didn't just fall on underneath. It wasn't just underneath the spot. The whole ground, right? It was probably covered in dew because all the mud was around, presumably. And so you can say, well, if you have a tablecloth that goes across, okay, it's actually better. It's a better zeichel laman because there was probably lots of man and there was probably lots of dew. Now, I don't know that that's the fact though. Maybe the dew only was in the spot where the man fell. I wasn't there to witness this. But I will say the following. I told you I'll share a little bit what I saw at my house. My father, by the way, my brother is now a listener of on the podcast version of this. So if I make a mistake, you'll let me know. But my recollection when we at home, that was that when my father he was of the Mimetic tradition. That's how he grew up again in Czechoslovakia. He was of the Mimetic tradition. He saw what his parents did, and he did exactly that in many aspects of his life. And it wasn't like learning from Mishnah Brewer. What do I do? He learned from his parents. Whenever on Friday night, on Shabbos day, when we made hamotzi, or when he set the table, he would always take a napkin, and he would put a napkin on the spot where the challah was about to go. We had a tablecloth, and they would put a napkin there. The challah would go on top of that, and then he would put the challah cover on top of it. I always thought, he does it. I didn't know any better when I was a kid. I was like, he does it because it's crumbs. It's easier to clean up, and you wrap it up. But I wonder, and I don't know. My brother maybe will tell me when he hears this. I don't remember what his parents did. I don't have a clear recollection on that. But I wonder if this came from the tradition of, his parents and their parents, or the Mimetic tradition of, you always put something underneath the challah. My father was very much. If he did it, I'd be very surprised that my grandfather didn't do that. And so I wonder if it came from this idea of the mun underneath. So we didn't count according to that, the tablecloth was not good enough, right? He wanted to put something underneath it.
Challah board.
So the challah board. So he would. I don't remember. I have to ask my brother what he did when he cut the challah. Because we had a board. He had a special knife. He had a special knife. I don't remember if it was enough though. I think he put the mappa.
And it would cover probably on top of the challah.
Right, but Steve is suggesting why shouldn't the challah board count as the underneath one? So actually, I had a little extra note in here that talks about the case of the challah board, and I wanted to bring that in here. And let's finish first the Mishnah Berurah, and then we'll take a look at the extra part here. Oh, and Simi, I know you had a question, right? Did you want to?
Well, I wanted to make a point,
Yeah.
but you, young man, should learn. Maybe the old man knew what he was doing.
Correct. So I think that he was very much passed down this tradition of you put a thing underneath. Maybe again, I never asked him, and unfortunately I can't ask him. But I would love to. I'd love to to really know that answer. We have usually a board underneath. That's what I end up going with.
All right, but the obvious point here is that the challah has a chashivus much more than simply challah. It has the chashivus of lechem mishnah, which was collected by the Jews before Shabbos.
Yeah.
So for that purpose, it has this chashivus, and we don't want to interfere with that. We don't want to diminish that.
100%. There is a certain yes, absolutely. You're right. We're giving a lot of kavod to this bread by reenacting a whole lot of
lechem upon him in the base maker.
In terms of
the challahs on the table on Shabbos representing the lechem upon
him. It means that they would bake it every Friday. It's fresh every Friday. I mean.
It is also I remember
they had 12 though.
3 bricks. It was kind of like a makubal.
Yeah.
Say on his Shabbos table he would have 12 loaves.
12 loaves. Wow.
Because it's the lechem upon.
Must be some Kabbalistic teaching or something.
There is some Kabbalistic teaching that there is a connection there.
Wow. All right. I don't know if it's in the Zohar. I'm not familiar with the source for that, but that's fascinating. Look, I mean, they baked it fresh every Friday, but there were 12 loaves. That's a lot of challah to make.
So when some people, we didn't get up to the part where how you cut the challah yet.
Yeah, we're gonna get there. Yes.
But some people have the minhag of taking one challah on top of the other challah and then cutting the 2 loaves together, so that way you get 4 loaves. You do that in 3 meals, you get 12 loaves.
Oh, interesting.
We're
gonna right. That's we're coming in Reish Ayin Daled about which one you break. I didn't hear the that you cut the cutting it twice, but we're gonna there'll be a sim in Reish Ayin Daled coming up. A few simanim from now, which will talk about how you cut the challah. Which challah do you cut? The top one, the bottom one. Is that Shabbos day, Shabbos Shabbos night, the night of Shabbos, Shabbos day. Different traditions about how you cut it. So yes, we will get there. Here this is coming up really beside the idea of Kiddush and the covering, I believe, that relates to Kiddush, because we have to cover the challah at the time of Kiddush. That's why it's coming up in this context here.
Right. So here there's connection with the man, and we're trying to recreate that with covered.
Yes, exactly what to do. Yeah. So it says here, according to all the reasons, the Pri Megadim says, "Dai b'mekadesh al yayin she chuse ad achar shegamar kiddush." And here also, I'll stop my father in a moment. But according to all the reasons, it's enough to make kiddush. It's enough to make kiddush on the wine, and it should be covered. The challah should be covered until after the kiddush is completed. Okay, but then after you finish reciting kiddush, you can uncover the challahs. Okay. That would make sense according to the first reason, for sure, because the whole idea was embarrassment. Well, the moment of embarrassment is over. Okay? The bracha is over, etc. According to the man reason, okay, so I had my little Zeichel Aman moment. Everyone could see at the table the cover on top and the cover on the bottom, and we're good. But
can I just interject something?
Yeah.
I mean, this is very cute, this idea of the embarrassment or giving human emotion to
the challah.
Inanimate object.
Yeah.
But halachically, your focus when you're making kiddush, right? If your focus is on the wine, you don't want to create any confusion that the kiddush is on the wine and not on the challah. So
right.
It would seem to me that's a more powerful reason to cover the challah.
So I think that look, I mean, at the end of the day, though, you make a bar pregaf, so hopefully you're megala das on whether it's challah or grape juice. But here, what I'll say is, though, the embarrassment piece. I believe the Yerushalmi here, like many midrashim, are using license to teach a lesson, which is that it's not right. It's not right to make brachos out of order. that when there's different foods on the table, you should get it right. That the bread really should go first. And the covering may actually serve as a halachic workaround and saying it's not here right now, it's out of mind, out of sight, and therefore, and now there's going to be a nafkamina by this, which is, I will admit, it's here in my extra notes. We're going to go over in a second. But Howie Bricks was the first one who brought it to my attention. If a Shalosh Shudis, Howie has usually like a list of like fun questions that relate to the parsha or something like that. One time I went to them b'shalach, and he asked me, he handed me the sheet with the questions, and or maybe he asked me, and it was about if he asked me the question, and it was about what's the nafkamina between these two approaches, about the challah cover, if you hold the zecher laman or this. And we're going to talk one of the nafkaminas in a moment about about the material of the challah cover. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. But I think it's a halachic, it's a midrashic license to talk about the halacha of which brachos come first. I don't actually think that the face of the challah turns red when we make kiddush, though I've never seen it because the challah is always covered. So, v'chein b'shacharit, the Mishnah Berurah says here, the same goes for making kiddush in the morning. The challah should remain covered until after you finish the kiddush bracha. Now, u'v'chaye adam, so pay attention carefully, Hinda. U'v'chaye adam mashma, the Chaye Adam says, it's clear from his opinion, according to the opinion of Zecher Laman, tov sheyeh mechusa ad achar birkas hamotzi, that the challah should remain covered until the end of the bracha of hamotzi. Okay, this was the tradition in my house when we grew up.
We don't like that.
In my house, my father, there were other places, people would take off the challah cover, they little slice it, and they make hamotzi. My father would not take off the challah cover, which is what I'm certain again, and my brother who's listening, when you listen to this year, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure my grandfather did this too. If my father did it like this, I'm sure my grandfather did it. He would only take off the challah cover after hamotzi. He probably couldn't tell me why, other than that's what my father did, but that's what happened in my house.
Exactly right.
So some people I've seen, they will keep it covered and they will pick it up covered. He would take his hand. That's not what he did. Which is again, he would take his hand. He put his hand on it, make the bracha, amos v'acham and remove it, and start slicing it.
Right.
That's what you saw in your house.
Probably my grandfather did.
Right. So this was the tradition that I grew up. What's funny is I have this little window into the world of European Jewry because of who my father was, and his adherence to what his parents did. So I have this little window into what was going on in Ungvar, in Usharan, right? So this was this was at least my father's tradition. He would always say hamotzi with the chalas covered and then remove and cut.
Aren't you supposed to? Some of these supposed to start to make.
Right, you make a little slit.
Right.
Yeah. So he didn't do that, but I'm not saying right or wrong. He didn't. That was not his tradition. But there are people who, even if they do keep it covered, I've seen this. I've seen both minhagim when I've gone to different people's house. They'll lift up the challah and give a little, put it, grab it back up, and then hamotzi lachem in haaretz. But the Chaye Adams, I don't know what they do in the Farber household. What do you do in the Farber household?
Keep the cover on.
And like the tradition of the Chaye Adam. Okay, so you're holding on to your family's tradition.
Exactly. Well, that's because what has gone on in my family.
Right. So this is what the Chaye Adam does, and he says that, and then it says here, Mishnah writes, if you end up having to make kiddush over bread. So here's what he suggests. This is if you're making kiddush over the bread. If you're making kiddush over wine and you're just doing challah over, then we'll talk about that in a few simanim. So yaniach yadav al hamapa ve'al halechem mishnah b'shas kiddush, which is kind of like what my father would do. But which is the regular hamotzi. Put your hand on the challah at the time when you're making, but on top of the mappa, which is on the lechem mishnah, as you're making kiddush. Which means you said vayachulu, you were covering your hand, you put your hand on the cover. When you get to hamotzi, yigale halechem mishnah. Right, he would uncover the lechem mishnah. V'yaniach yado alehem v'yivarech hamotzi. He would uncover it, put his hand on the bread. Now with no cover, make hamotzi. Now you have all kiddush brachas still to make. Because yagia laHashem, right? When you got to God's name, he would take the challah and lift it up, right? Like Yishnein Lamala Ad Yigmor Hashem, until he finishes God's name. Yanichem. Then what do we do? We put it back down, right? He said, sorry. Okay. Ad Yigmor Hashem ve'achar kach yanichem. Right, and then put it down. Ve'achar Gemar Hamotzi. When he completed Hamotzi, then Yachzor b'Yichased Amapa. Cloth goes back over top to cover it. V'yaniach yado aleihem, and he would put his hand on them. This is what you would do according to the Eliyah Rabbah and the Derech HaChaim. When you're making kiddush over bread, you start covered, hand on the challah, or you can't hold it because we usually hold a cup of wine. So what do you got? So instead, you put the hand over top of the challah. When you get to hamotzi, you uncover, you lift up, you put your hand on it. When you get to Hashem's name, you lift it up, put it back down, and then you're back, hand on it until the end of hamotzi. Then recover it all for the rest of the bracha of Mekadesh or Shabbos that you're going to make afterwards. So that way, what you're doing is essentially for the bracha Rishona part, you're having a more direct acknowledgement of this is what I'm eating. So I want to have it like anytime you eat, you're supposed to really hold it in your hand. Like if you're making a bracha on an apple, making a bracha on the apple, you should be holding the apple in your hand, ready to eat it when you make a bracha. Now, here we have an interjecting bracha because I'm making the kiddush over. If it's wine, but here in this case, over the bread. Therefore, it's interjecting. Anyways, you're
saying motzi, so there's you make the motzi in place of the bar priya gafen, right?
Correct.
And then you're saying the kiddush bracha.
Correct.
So there's a little bit of a hefech hadas between the motzi and the eating of the bread.
Right, but which is allowed. Whoever, anytime you do birchas hamitz, like under the chuppah, the rabbi will make a bar priya gafen and then the bracha for the kiddushin. When you go to a bris, baruch atah Hashem, makir machlam bar priya gafen. Then baruch atah Hashem, kidashi doing beten, b'chok be'er sam, etc. That is a standard how you enhance the mitzvah. You make bar priya gafen, and while you're in the midst of the bar priya gafen, holding to drink, you make the bracha for the mitzvah. Yeah. Avdallah, exactly. The bar priya gafen comes first, and then you have the bar Maria Aish and the Shvitzamim. The Shvitzamim actually come first, and bar Maria.
Right.
Yeah. Shvitzamim and then Aish. It's actually machlokas in the Gemara about the order. And then Avdallah. So that's not atypical here because I'm using the bread here in this situation that I have this kind of bracha that's hanging over it, but I cover it back up because we want this. It's not because of the embarrassment factor. It's really because we want this veichel leman. We want to remember the man, and as we begin the meal, we're making kiddush. We want to have that experience. Okay, so I had to interject with my hamotzi, putting my hands directly on the challah. I put it back down, and then back to covering the man. Simeon, I saw your hand up, and Hindo.
I think Hinda also raised her hand, Rav.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hinda.
Hinda, you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered, does it have to be a cloth? Or if you like to serve your challah warm from the oven and it's enclosed in foil, does that count? Or do you have to have a cloth on top of the foil?
So I would say you probably should put a cloth on top of the foil based on what we're learning. Why? Because the language, because if you're creating the dew experience, so the idea is about having something on the the bottom and something on the top, and not necessarily the same, even though dew is dew. But the idea is to have something on top and something on the bottom. You could say, well, I'm enveloping it. Right. But I think for the symbolism, the idea is to have something on the bottom, and the foil could maybe be the bottom part, even though it's coming up, so you're keeping it warm. But I think something should go on top because you're giving it the double cover. I get that it's wrapped up all around. And it's and by the way, as Richie's saying, maybe it's even better because munach b'kufsa. It's really in a kufsa. It's in a box. I don't know. I'm not saying that what I'm saying is correct. It's a good question. Would aluminum foil all the way around? I mean, some you have something what to rely upon. You could definitely say that it's the imagery of munach b'kufsa. Somehow, it's striking me as like it should be two separate things. I don't know. That's how I'm reading this. That Because I'll tell you why also. That's coming to me like a little more reasoning here. The
Right.
mappa that's on top and underneath the bread in the description of the Shulchan Aruch, no doubt could probably come up and wrap around the other one. And yet he says that there should be a mappa underneath, that's tachas apas, that's sort of a unique one that's underneath the bread. I'm not saying it can't come around on top of it, but umapa acheres, his words are umapa acheres, prusa al gabav, another mappa on top. Again, I think this is just an attempt at really driving home the symbolism here of when the man would fall and the Jews would come out to pick it, there was dew underneath and dew on top, and by putting two things there, you say, well, but one thing is good, but by putting two things there, you really drive home the symbolism of this is the Zeicher Laman moment. Again, if somebody did this where they only use the aluminum foil, and then I don't think anybody will be. There's nothing ma'akev about this. Meaning, like if you make kamotzi without doing this, okay. I mean, you missed out on an opportunity. That's the worst thing is you missed out on an opportunity, and you might even claim that it's still what you're describing is still good enough. And again, according to the first reason, certainly the aluminum foil is fine. The whole part is the embarrassment that the bracha is in the incorrect order, right? You should be start with hamotzi. For that reason, the aluminum foil would suffice, undoubtedly.
Dew in the desert, nice.
The dew in the desert should, as Bruce was just pointing out, dew in the desert is a nace in and of itself. Forgetting the mud falling from the sky, but having dew in the desert is already miraculous.
Must you have the challah on the table though before you make hamotzi?
Yes.
You
Yes.
have to have it when you make kiddush.
Yes, and yes. That is very important. I will admit that there have been times that I have actually, in getting the table ready, that I would make kiddush, everyone would be singing, and like I forgot the challah on the counter in the kitchen.
Oh my God.
It's happened. It's important to have the challah on the table because of the symbolism as you're bringing in, you're being mekadesh the Shabbos. The symbolism of the shtei alechem should be on the bread as you begin the meal. The shtei alechem and which again is zeicher laman, and therefore once the lechem has to be at the table, right? That's the whole chap in Paris Mapo Makadesh. Why do I have to cover the bread at the table with a cloth? Why not just remove it? No, because it should be there. The two loaves of bread should be there as you begin the meal. It's an important symbol of the Shabbos as of our beginning of our Shabbos meal. Okay, so now I wanted to read a couple of my extra comments here because I thought they were fascinating because they talk about some of these questions that arise in this scenario. 47, 48, 49. Okay, so I guess Tommy, you have it. So I'm going to start over at 47 here. So for everyone else, you'll just listen, and we'll help you along here. So the inyan kisui. So number 47. So this is talking about the embarrassment factor. If you're holding of the embarrassment factor, and here's how he bricks nafkamina, ready? Ule'inyan kisui shapas near ace darko. What if I have a cover, but it's see-through? So I cover the challah, but it's a see-through cover, so I can see it. Mamish, only the Jews can make a shiloh like this.
It's a double. It's naked and
right.
That's not a
so he says go nylon shakuf, a Ziploc bag basically, right? So your challah is in a Ziploc, so you can see the challah, but it's covered. And by the way, it's covered on both sides because we have the Ziploc. Okay. So v'chadoma, so you're using nylon shakuf. Okay. Das Rav Nissen Karlitz. Yes, he weighed in on this shaila. Shalafi atam shalot yireh hapas boshta ein kisui kaze nechtav l'kisui. If you hold of the reason of embarrassment, this does nothing. The challah is looking out from the back in its muffled voice and saying, "What are you doing?" Right, and is embarrassed, and you can see that the challah is turning red, etc. A person looks at this and says, "This is bread in front of me." A person looks at it and they're not thinking it's covered bread. It's uncovered bread. I'm looking at the challah. I see that there are There's there are raisins on this challah. I'm looking at the challah with the clarity. Umeidach, but there's another postik, a very big chashuv postik. Hagaon or Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shekisui nylon, he paskin kisui nylon moil aflitam zeh. No, kisui nylon even works according to this first reasoning. V'ha'ikar hu shetia pas mechuseh. And but here at the end here that
Yes.
it's better. It sounds like v'ha'ikar shu shetia pas mechuseh. It should be covered, meaning it's fine, but lechatchila. Invest more than just Ziploc. Get a nice challah cover. Okay, so therefore, if you're using if you end up whatever, you're somewhere in a hotel somewhere or here, whatever, you're making gamotzi and it's in a plastic bag because you got nothing better, so it's fine. Again, for the purposes of Shabbos, it's nice to put a nice challah cover on there if you haven't. Anyways, all right. The next comment here. This is an interesting one because this happens often. By the way, we had a dinner here on the shul Friday night. A lot of people there and a lot of challah around the room. And sometimes the challah, when these caterers set it up, is not covered like it was, by the way, this Friday night. The kiddush was made in the shul and people proceeded to go into the social. So maybe this is less of an issue in that world. But it's interesting. If you didn't notice, by the way, I missed the kiddush. Anybody know what I was doing, by the way? I ran to the kitchen. I told on Monday at the staff meeting here, sometimes I'm a part of, and I said to the staff, I said, can you make sure the caterer has 2 challahs ready? Because after davening's over, I'm going to quickly go and I'm going to run and bring the challah wherever we're making the kiddush, because of this idea that when you make kiddush, there should be challah present. Anyways, I made it too late. I grabbed 2 rolls and I was just walking in as everyone was walking out for the kiddush. I made kiddush myself, but really, ideally, you're supposed to make kiddush with challah there. But he says here, "Va'anashim rabim hayoshvim stavim shulchanot." Let's say you have many people sitting around many tables. Umunachas lifneim pas b'chol shulchan. There's bread on every table, like at a lot of these dinners. So, custom b'shelos t'shuos igros Moshe. So, Moshe Feinstein wrote in his shuos, even if people are being yotze from one person who's making kiddush for the room, they should make sure to cover the pas that's in front of them, the bread that's in front of them. So, Rabbi Morgenstern is making kiddush in the middle of the room. Everyone at their own table should take their challah and they should take their napkin there and they should put it over top of it. Right? We had a team dinner a few weeks ago and I had the team before I made the kiddush because the challahs were just sitting on the table. I said, everyone take your napkin, put it over top of it. You should still make sure this. For the embarrassment factor, it's not a problem. Because if I'm on the right hand, I'm on the table 10, which is on the corner of the social, and the rabbi's making kiddush on the dance floor. So what does my challah know of embarrassment? I'm not the one who's embarrassing them. He's like, oh, that other guy is making kiddush over there. The challah is not worried about that. Right? I'm not the one making the bracha. So there shouldn't, for the first reason, it's not a problem. I don't need to have covering. But the idea of zeicher laman is very important, right? And therefore, even if you have somebody making kiddush on the other side of the room, you should still cover your challah. Kevin shechovas kakisui eina mechamas hayayin ela mechamas apas atzma. The obligation comes from the bread itself. Mazel tov on the Chag Torah. Vehein lefi atam shelo tira hapas boshta. And according to the reason that the bread shouldn't be embarrassed, should be kol makom yesh lepas boshes makdimin la'as hayayin. So I mean, for the reason of embarrassment, that's not a factor. Okay, but Bechein Das on Nissim Karlitz, Meidach Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, Shlofi Atam Shlotira Pas Bloshta Ein Tzarich Lachas Lepas Ela Mekadesh Umisha Torah Mehayayin. Only the people who make the kiddush and who taste the wine, they need to worry about covering the challah for the reason of embarrassment. Okay, and he adds for the hostif Shalamasta. What's happening practically? People coming to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach asking about all these affairs that are happening. Nogin lahakel. Lamaisa, he says, if you're not going to cover it, so again, if nobody covered the challah, it's fine. Except the person who's making the kiddush should look at their challahs, cover their challahs, and anyone who's going to taste the wine. Technically, you don't have to taste the wine, when kiddush. As long as the person who made kiddush, drinks enough of the wine, I'm yotze. I'm good for kiddush. It's mitzvah ben amufchar to taste a little bit of the wine, but if I don't, it's still I'm yotze. But if I'm gonna, so those people have to cover the challah, but otherwise you don't need to cover the challah. So therefore, the Rav Shlomo Zalman is really paskening here that people who go to catered affairs for Shabbos are good. Okay. Let me just there was one more comment here I wanted to add here. Oh, here. So here he writes, okay, there's number 49, Tommy. Ba'af hamapa haprusa ala shulchan. Even the tablecloth that's spread over the shulchan. So if this Carla says Shoma'ila le'inyan zeh, that can count as one of your covers. So if the challah, which is not like what my father did, right? Who put an extra napkin underneath. But he says that the tablecloth for Vincent Carlos Paskins, that the tablecloth itself can be one, and then you put something on top of it. But he adds, V'hosi, Sha'af im yesh keresh tachas hachalos. No, I look over the word keresh, I didn't know what it was. Yeah, the wooden board. Okay, yeah. Right, correct. By the way, in the scripture of the Mishnah, the crushing, it didn't hit me when I was learning. I was like, oh, crushing, right? Okay, it's the word. So when you talk about the board, the challah board, right, that people use, he paskins ain't who chotzeitz bein hachalos to bein hamapa. He says it's interesting. It doesn't count as the underneath as the dew, probably because it's wood. It's not. Doesn't give off it's not flexible. Dew is is not a wooden board. So, but he says it's not a chatzitza. So even if you have the wooden board where the challah is, and underneath it you have the tablecloth, he says it's not a chatzitza. Bein hachalos bein hamapa, and therefore that can count as your underneath mappa, and you'll put a challah cover over top of the challah on the board. That is not a chatzitza. Yeah, you're good, right? You can wipe away the sweat over your brow. Otherwise, right, correct. By the way, it would be correct if anybody knew such a psak halacha, the challah board business would be done. Right, correct. So anyone who puts their challah on the challah board and then covers it over top, you're fine. You have your tablecloth underneath, your challah board, and then your challah over the top. Just about, yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, you're gonna start the menu there. Oh, no worries. Okay, so let's just we're gonna do a little bit of yud, and then we'll pause. Okay, so hopefully any shilas now before we move on, because this is it for the little. Yeah, go ahead, Stephen. Any about the challah? Yeah.
Yes, Rav. Isn't there a time factor between the recitation of a bracha and the following act over which the bracha was made?
You're saying there's a time limit, sort of?
Yes, here you're putting your hands under the mappa, you're making the bracha, and you take off the mappa, and then you have to slice the challah. But you already made a bracha a couple of moments ago.
Yeah.
Is there a difficulty with that?
Yeah, so we'll talk more about this in Reish Ayin Dal, but I will just say I'll make a lachach right now that when you make hamotzi, you should cut you cut the challah immediately after the bracha is over, and the person who made the mevarech should take the first slice that they cut and take a bite right away, because that minimizes the time. But for everyone else sitting around the table, they should all sit quietly and wait. As long as the reason you want to minimize the time between the bracha and the achila is because you don't want a hefsek to be created. Here you have no other. If you're sitting on the other end of the table, you have no other option than to wait, and you have to just sit quietly. It's really important during that time not to talk, not to create a hefsek or hefsek hadas. And to the extent that the person who's slicing up the challah can do it with some good pace, that's best. But the person who makes the bracha should try to take a bite first, right after they cut one piece, take a bite, and then continue cutting for everybody else. Yes, in Reish Ayin Dal, yes, Reish Ayin Dal, we're going to talk about which challah, the upper challah, lower challah. Ein ma'avirin ala mitzvos, but use the bottom one. Yes, so it's going to be a whole discussion in Reish Ayin Dal. So we'll
Yeah.
get there. We'll get there before you know it. So in Sif Yud here we write Mikadesh al Hayayin. Okay, by the way, this is also another one. So that everyone has different traditions for. I know I do exactly what my father did, even though I'm aware of all these other opinions. What position should I be in when I make kiddush? Standing, sitting, sitting, standing, sitting. You know, it's like a whole. There are many traditions. I'm sure if I went around the table here, I'd probably get different opinions. So Sif Yud, Mikadesh al Kos Malayayin. But before we even get into the position of how I make the kiddush, you're supposed to make the kiddush with a full cup of wine. You're like, what else was I supposed to do? So here is a funny thing. Why shalo yeh pogum? So it shouldn't be pogum. It shouldn't be pogum. Is like
Flawed.
flawed. It's a good way to put it. I mean, it's a flawed cup. There are many halachas about kos pogum. What's a kos pogum? If somebody you have a cup of wine, it can be full, by the way. You take a little sip of it, I put it back down. That's now a kos pogum, right? You can't take that cup now and pick it up and make a new kiddush. Right? Somebody else can't pick it up and make kiddush with that cup. There's ways to fix the kos pogum, but you're not allowed to. And one of the things that you should do when you make kiddush is that your cup should be full. Or look at me like, why wouldn't it be full? I'll tell you why you wouldn't make it full. Let's say you had a huge goblet of wine, huge goblet, and you're like, I don't want to drink all this wine. Right? If I fill it up, I'm going to use 3/4 of my bottle of wine, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste the wine. I'm not drinking that much right now. I want to drink a little bit and drink more, later and tomorrow, whatever. So you know what? The answer is you should use a smaller cup. As long as you have a revius of yayin in there, you're good enough in terms of the minimum shear. But however big your cup is, as long as it's bigger than a revius, your cup should be full when you make kiddush.
So
Yes,
I would
Steve.
add, you're young, you don't know.
Yeah.
But when you get older, not everybody's hands are as steady as they used to be.
And
when
you're
they're
going to
young.
spill, right?
And you fill up your kos, and you see if you think of sometimes doing this,
Yep.
and half of it's going to end up on the.
It's going up right, correct. Yes. So here's what I would say. Let's look at the Mishnah Berurah about this, and in terms of his definition of full. What is a full cup? And then I'll give my 2 cents on this question. So he writes here, Sif Katan Membez, Al Kos Male, the Kos Shel Kiddush v'Havdalah hu bichlal shar Kos Shel Bracha that tzarich sheyeh Male. The Kos of Kiddush and Havdalah is included in the amongst other cups that need to be full when I make the bracha. Another example of this where it first comes up, Sif Beis, the Hagah. This comes up in the Siman about benching. That when you use a cup at the end of benching, you should use a kos malayayin, a cup full of wine. That's where it first comes up, and the Ramah discusses it over there, that it should be a full cup of wine. V'im einenu maleh ve'ein lo kos acher le'aros besocho. And if it's not full, and there's no other cup to pour into, meaning a smaller cup to pour into, so that way that cup is full. So mutar lekadesh alav, you can still use it to make kiddush. Meaning, if you don't have kos malayayin, you still make kiddush. It's just you're losing a hidur of it. It's really the right thing. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that in a moment. I'll give you my way, my definition of weighing in. And he says, "Mutar lekadosh lav kevin sheyesh shir revius." You have a revius in there, b'hayayin shebesocho, that the wine inside it. The muchach lekamei b'sif yudalef, as we'll discuss later on in Sif Yud Aleph, where they talk about the pouring of the cup of wine for other people who want to taste in the wine. So I'm going to turn to the Siman Kuf page. Actually, I was going to pull it up on here, but let me pull it up here. First with the issue over here, but it wasn't this one. Actually, last night when I was preparing. So in Kuf Peidal, which again is a Siman about Birkas Hamazon on the wine and Birkas Hamazon. Here we go. Kuf. I grabbed it the wrong way. Sorry, it's base, not olive. Sorry. Okay. Of course. Steady. Solid.
You see, if you hold Ein Mavirin, Rav, we should have learned from the Sefer you took down.
Right. Well, that's That's the challenge of making mistakes, though, when I'm in the middle of. Okay, Kufpei Gimel Siv Beis. So Kufpei Gimel Siv Beis. The Ramah here says that he says v'kos del bracha yim al enu shehemale al kol gidosav. In terms of full, right? He says it should be full al kol gidosav. The word gidosav. I just want to make sure I translated it correctly for me. The surface of the edges, right? Right. Right. Correct. So you're supposed to, right? It's supposed to be up to the top. I think you have to use a little bit of. Maybe I'm being too. You have to use safe. Look. Right. So I think it should be the kind of cup when you look at it, people say it's a full cup, right? And that matters in other areas of halacha, how people see things, how people define it. By the way, it comes up, and I don't want to open up a can of worms here, so let's not go down this rabbit hole. But when we talk about, is it called bread b'shem uvetoar, right? When you're trying to define certain things, that tells you already that how people perceive something does matter in halacha. I mean, if something seems like it's full. It's full. I have poured wine before, and there's still a little bit of space there, and I'll pour. But there, if you look, go under the microscope. There's still space there, So I think that's considered full. I will say that I've been right, correct. If I think I want a full cup of water, I had a full glass of water. Doesn't mean it was to the top. It's a full glass, and then how you will define full. I think in this situation matters. I mean, even though it has to go up all kol gidosav according to the Ramah. I was wondering if the Mishnah Berurah actually over there weighed in, because I didn't look. Oh, here he does weigh in actually. Let's see what he says here. Oh, look at this. The Mishnah Berurah talks about it over there. I didn't look at this one before today. Even though something will spill as a result on the ground, it sounds like he thinks it should be full. There are those who don't fill it up, all the way to the tippy top because of this reason that it's going to spill. Shame. I didn't look at this before. Shame male alav. You could still call it full. That's why I don't think you need to have it spilling. And here now, I should have prepared this part. I didn't. But the Mishnah Berurah says exactly the reason I said, which is it's still people call that full. Okay, fine. So bottom line is that we see here very clearly that when you make kiddush on a full cup, it doesn't mean that it has to be spilling over the top. Some may hold like that, and that's fine. No, I don't hold. Sometimes I spill because I also have actually sometimes some unsteady hands. But I'm young, which is whatever. I don't know what that means, but yeah. Anywho, so that's the whole thing about kos malayin. All right, let's what time is it? Let's pause here. We'll pause here. We'll talk about kos pug because that's a whole topic of itself. But I have to go back over here about kos pugum and talking about how to define kos pugum, how to get yourself out of a kos pugum situation. We'll talk about that next time, and then we'll talk about how the Mishnah, the Shulchan Aruch envisions the positioning of yourself for Kiddush. You say it's standing? Do you say it's sitting? Different opinions here. Why we start with the Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu Hashamayim. Anybody know what acronym is hidden in Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu Hashamayim?
God's name.
Hashem's name. Good. God's name. If you took the first letter of Yom HaShishi Vayechulu Hashamayim, it spells God's name.
Okay.
That's correct. Very good. And so that's why some people say, you have to stand during Vayechulu because we start by standing because we're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. But then you can sit afterwards. And then in terms of when you're making Kiddush, you're supposed to look at the candles that are in the room, that are illuminating the room. So there's a lot of customs that we have around Kiddush time, so we'll talk about those, and I'm sure everyone around the table will have an opportunity to share what minhag they saw their parents doing, when they made kiddush. Yom Hashishi by Chulu Hashamayim. Look at think about the first letter of each one of them. Okay. Sorry, my 9-year-old over here is asking. He's trying to do the letters in his head right now. It's that kind of thing. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna turn the recording off. Hold on one second. All right. We'll stop here. Just as a head.